I'm Srini, host and founder of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. And in this video tutorial, I work with consultant Mike Martin to help him take better meeting notes in MEM so that he can remember the most important insights from his meetings and the most important tasks that he needs to complete after meeting with his clients. And if you're interested in learning more about how to use MEM, be sure to check out our free course on how to take smart notes. I'll include a link in the description below. So what is your name and what do you do?
Yeah, I'm Mike Martin. I am an IT consultant. I do implementations for my clients. Mainly, I focus on NetSuite ERP software implementations and also business process improvement with them. So I work for a consulting firm called Simply Put Consulting, and we specialize in all kinds of IT. But the practice that I lead is the ERP implementation. So really focused on software implementations.
So how long have you been using MEM, and what is it that you were hoping MEM would enable you to do that you haven't been able to do with other apps?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in, I would say probably about a year. I got in very early when it first hit the market. So I guess that's about a year, maybe. And I've been really searching for a better way to capture notes and manage my work, really. So I've tried a lot of different note-taking apps. I've used Evernote for many years and have been going through a lot of the new sort of knowledge management software, like things like Notion and Craft and even something called Noteplan 3. And I heard of MEM. I was watching a lot of YouTube videos about personal knowledge management, and just MEM came across YouTube. I started looking into it. And the thing that really interested me about it was the AI aspect and the whole idea of their bow tie diagram and this self-organizing workspace. I just felt like I was spending a lot of time managing my notes instead of working from them and getting the value from them. So that really intrigued me. Switched from all other apps, and I'm basically using them for all my note taking.
Okay, fantastic. What did the other apps lack that MEM has given you? And then we'll get right into this and see how we can make over your setup so you can get even more out of it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I get from MEM that I didn't with others is simplicity. I like that it's a very clean experience and you can shape it the way you want. And it does feel like it gets out of the way, where I think some other apps were just in the way because they were trying to look a certain way, or the UI was just creating friction. So that's the main thing I like, is it seems to be a very low friction piece of software. And I'm very interested in where it's going, really, and hoping for more and more of that self-organization.
Cool. And before we get right into actually having you open MEM, what are your current challenges with MEM that you're hoping that we'll be able to address during this call?
Yeah. So I spend a lot of time in capture mode, attending meetings with my clients all day long. I'm constantly capturing knowledge. I'm capturing tasks. There's a lot of recurring things that happen, things I have to come back to. And so some of the challenges are having MEM present the knowledge that I need when I want it, and when it matters to me. And certainly just coming back to things that I have to revisit. I'm looking for more of that. Okay. And I know it's not the best at task management, and that's an evolving. And so I'm still struggling with how to manage my tasks, because I get very quick capture of them, but it seems I'm spending most of my time on the capture and not enough time on the execution.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a common problem. Let's do this. Let's have you open up MEM. Okay. And walk me through how you have it set up currently, particularly for the key areas. Let's do meeting notes, because I think that's the one that really sounds like is where your biggest work is, at least in terms of where you're capturing most of your knowledge and where you're capturing most of your tasks.
Sure. So here's my MEM setup. And you can see I've got my calendar linked. So you can see I've got some of my meetings all lined up here. And a lot of times I am using the create mem for event and then getting a meeting. So I guess I could just show maybe one of the things to do here. So let's say
walk me through what your workflow would be, for example, after this call. Let's just assume you had a couple of tasks like email Srini a write-up about the session or something like that. Just write two or two really basic tasks. I mean, you can just put email Srini or whatever it is, but walk me through what your typical workflow would be from a meeting, and then we'll go into one of your previous meetings.
One of the things I'm doing is using a template. So I have this meeting template, and so I've got a tag there with meeting. I might add, another tag right at the start of my meeting. So maybe like this could be a mem tips related tag, and then I might but I've got the attendees automatically from the calendar here. So I'll probably just would delete that. And then as we talk, I'm spending a lot of time just quick capturing things that I talk about with my clients here. I might say discussed mem config. And as we would go on with the conversation, I'll be capturing a lot of things. And then let's just say, so one of the first things we hit, I have to email. Okay, I'll say email Srini. And I'll just capture tasks here. Review mem setup, maybe. And I don't know, read notes, something like that. Okay. And let's say that while we're talking here, just for lack of a better tag, say we talked about how to take, so like better meeting, and I know I've already got the hashtag, but I might use hashtags here like this, meeting notes. And let's just say, let me just use the meeting hashtag, right? So I'll do that, and then I'll say notes here. And so a lot of times with my clients, if we're talking about a specific software configuration, or if it's something to do with NetSuite, I might do things, I'll put keep hitting that. I've got a NetSuite tag and say it's related to ERP. I got a tag for that. And then we got a tag for CRM. And so I'm often tagging things like that related to the topic I'm discussing with the client, or maybe it's got something to do with data migration. I might do something like that, move, data from the old system, something like that.
Okay, great. This is super helpful. Show me one of your existing meeting notes, because obviously they're probably a lot more detailed than the one that you just did here. Because I think when you and I were talking, one of the first things I noticed was how you were tagging, which often tends to be one of the biggest sources of problems for people, is that they use tags excessively. But let's go into one of your previous meetings, because I think that'll help to really frame.
That one's a little light, but maybe that's also light. Let me go back here, find a good. This is one where I'm doing a certain structure. So I have a meeting with my colleague here. And so one of the things I'm doing is making a note like this, where I've got various client tags and then the running list of them. So this is kind of like my parent note. And then I can go into different notes from this one.
Okay. So one first thing I can tell you is, if you have a meeting like this with a partner, right, called Mike and George Weekly, what you could do is you could use the tag Mike George, so you don't actually have to have this parent page, and you'll always be able to find anything that's tagged. But also now I see that you also have Memex enabled as a beta user. The nice thing about that is it'll show all the related mems anyway, so you can see, similar to this mem, which actually basically gets rid of the need for tags in a lot of ways, which is super cool. And I'm gonna do a tutorial on the YouTube channel for this. Dennis actually walked me through this, and I was blown away. He's basically, that makes it super easy. But one of the things that I had talked about when I was teaching the mem course to a cohort, people were asking, like, when do you use tags and when do you use links? And the way I see it is that links are great for connecting ideas and tags are great for connecting notes. And there's a difference. So for example, as a writer, I'm always connecting ideas together, but it doesn't always make sense to use links in certain cases. So for example, if you had the tag Mike and George Weekly, every single meeting, or if you just tag it with meetings and Mike/George, then every meeting that was related to Mike and George would just show up there. And that would actually end up making this a little cleaner. So one of the things that people do with tags that is actually wrong is they have too many of them. And the problem with tags is that, especially when you tag by topic in particular, is that topics are infinite. Tiago Forte wrote about this on his blog, and I think I've shared this article before in the Slack group, but he talked about tagging by context instead of topic. And for example, if you have a meeting with a particular client, it might make more sense to use the tag client meeting. And then depending on, what you're talking about, to your point, if you're talking about NetSuite, or if NetSuite is the only thing that you're consulting on, then that kind of becomes, excessive in terms of tagging. So there's no reason to necessarily tag it with that. So that's the first thing, is to think about tagging by context instead of tagging by topic will actually reduce a lot of overhead. So let's go back to this. So one of the things you mentioned is that you wanted to make sure that you remember to do all of this stuff. Now, typically, one of the things you can do is if you go to tasks, you can actually set your tasks to be done at certain times. So go ahead and click on the tasks section on the left-hand sidebar. And so you can send these to a certain time.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So just pick any one of them if you wanted to. So let's say you pick that, and go ahead and say, okay, press that button, and then type in next weekend or whatever. Or specifically, yeah. So that's one thing. And then the tasks, then you actually also end up getting rid of the clutter so you can focus on today. But if you click that bar, the little drop down arrow above that says upcoming.
Oh, here. Yeah.
You'll see there's the email to Srini.
So these are all the ones I moved to the future.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. I didn't know any of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one way you can actually manage tasks a little bit more effectively.
Yeah, I like that.
But go back to the mem. This is something that Dennis showed me the other day because somebody had asked me about reminders. So go ahead and put this, and go ahead and add this to your inbox.
Okay. Okay. Should I go to the inbox?
Yeah. If you go to the inbox and then see the little clock sign.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can snooze that.
Oh.
And then,
same thing. I could push it to any, like I could say next weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool.
So that will help with the sort of timing tasks and reminder component of this. But let's go back in and actually look at how you're structuring these notes. You're using a template absolutely makes complete sense because the templates are going to be the same all the time. But so for example, you have these topics, NetSuite, ERP, CRM, and of course, depending on whether those are redundant, if I remember correctly, NetSuite is a CRM tool, correct? Okay, so then the tag becomes somewhat redundant. So again, depending on this, so in this case, this is basically memtips would be the other thing you could do is tag it with a client name. Or you just tag it with a client meeting and you use the name of the client for the actual note. So one thing that I think is vitally important that people often overlook is naming your notes properly, because especially when you start to talk about bidirectional links. And I've seen this over and over again. And I saw this in my course when people just copied a bunch of quotes. And I said, yeah, it's great. You have access to the information. The problem is that without a title, yeah, you might get the result that you're looking for, but it's going to be a lot harder to find things. So for example, if you didn't have a title, in your similar mems would be useless because you wouldn't know what the note is about, even though the AI will surface things that are related to this. But I think one big thing I would say is, so you have Mike and George, so you could say partner meeting or client meeting. So that way, if you used, for example, the tag client meeting, then all your notes from meetings with your clients would show up. And that would actually make this process a lot more streamlined. So part of the issue is that you're actually using too many tags. And this is actually a big problem that a lot of people have. So for example, if one of the things that you discussed or a task for that meeting was, data migration from the old system, was the task that you're going to complete, what would actually be more appropriate here is to actually create a bidirectional link that is data migration from the old system. And that would actually then link to these meeting notes. And you could actually then in your tasks also say, basically, you could use a bidirectional link as an action item. So for example, you could say, hey, review data migration, but it would be a bidirectional link. And if it's for a specific client, you could say data migration for whatever, or if it's something that you do repetitively. So chances are that based on what I know about what you've told me, there are probably a lot of similarities between the kinds of things that you're doing for your clients as well, in terms of the tasks. So one thing that would be actually really useful, I think, just based on what you've told me, is to have a sort of templated set of action items that typically come up in conversations with customers. You probably have done the same task over and over again for hundreds of clients. So from that, what you could do is you could create a new client template or client meeting template, and that would actually streamline your entire process of going through meetings. So actually, let's do this. Let's say that you are onboarding a new client and you have a meeting with them. Walk me. So let's create a mem as if you're doing that. And let's go through that. And we'll use that as an example for how to take better meeting notes and get all the information you need. Call, the client whatever you want. We'll call it some fictitious client.
Right. Yeah. Call it NSCO.
Okay.
And okay, so that's my title.
Okay, so what you're going to do,
maybe call this like onboarding.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, if you have onboarding, my guess is the onboarding is the same every time, right? Or there are probably common similarities. So what you'd probably want to do is to actually create a template for onboarding new clients. So you could basically, go into flows and, put in all the various things that you do. Because one of the things that templates are really useful for is anything where the process doesn't change, but the content does.
Right.
Over and over, we see this because if you look at knowledge workers in general, largely they're repeating the same processes over and over again, but the content doesn't. The content changes. That's true for content creators. That's true for consultants. That's true for anybody who does any kind of knowledge work. Yes, there are going to be variables that change, but the process itself of completing the task doesn't change. So that would also streamline your meeting notes process. So what happens in this first call that you have with a client? Let's say NSCO is your client. What are we going to learn about NSCO here in this call?
Sure. We would probably start with talking about their timeline, their scope, two key things that you would do when you first engage with a client.
Okay. So what I would recommend in that case is to create a mem for both timeline and scope of engagement for NSCO.
So like a separate note. So
yeah, but as a bidirectional, there you go. Exactly. As a bidirectional link from here. Because the idea here is that you're going to have this one sort of central page where everything related to NSCO lives. And of course, because it's going to be tagged the right way, it'll all, be properly configured and it'll be easy to find. So that's not an issue. But the thing is, for you don't want to be like basically going from mem to mem. Even within mem, context shifting can start to become an issue if you have 100 different things, 100 places. Luckily, you don't have to move any data between different apps, but still, we want to be able to just say, okay, this is my central resource for all things related to this client. Okay, so now you've got an implementation timeline. What I would also do is so this is where this whole idea of tagging via context via topic matters. For For certain things, you want to be very specific with your tags, but when it comes to contextual tagging, you want to be more general. So in this case, you would say onboarding meeting as your tag, because then let's say that you have 20 different clients who you've onboarded, you'd have all their onboarding meeting notes right there. So that way you could say, okay, this is the onboarding meeting for this client. And then, and everything related to that one client is right there. So having all the onboarding meeting notes. So then what ends up happening, and again, like I said, with the fact that we have MEMX now, this isn't nearly as important as it once was, but it does generally make your life easier. So let's say you had 5 or 6 different MEMs with onboarding meeting and 5 or 6 different clients, then you could quickly go through all the various onboarding notes for your different clients. So this is something I do. For example, I write a lot of landing pages. So anytime I write sales copy for a page, I don't actually the landing page copy for whatever, that becomes the title, but the actual tag is just landing page copy, because often I'm using landing page copy that I'm reusing and moving from one place to another, or taking that landing page copy and putting it into an email newsletter. And so I don't want to actually have to do anything other than just see a list of all those landing pages. Or another example is when I do a product launch. We have landing pages, we have campaign emails. So I don't do anything other than the tag campaign email. So basically what you want to do when it comes to contacts tags, you want to be more general, because it forces a constraint in which you have to limit the number of tags you use. That right there is the big issue that I see over and over again with people. And it took me a while to get this as well. Tags just end up being excessive because it's, like I said, topics are infinite, but contexts are not. You probably have X number of contexts that you operate in on a daily basis. So for example, onboarding meetings, client follow-up meeting, whatever it is. And so that way, by limiting the number of tags that you have, particularly for these different types of meetings, you don't create this giant mess, which ends up being impossible to clean up later. And this is often why people have many of the issues they do when they use Evernote, because they have so many tags, they can never find anything. And so it defeats the purpose. And one of the things Sokka Arendt's talked about in How to Take Smart Notes, and this is relevant to people who are not just writers, is to tag on behalf of your future self. And so obviously your future self is not going to know in explicit detail very small, very specific things, as well as something as simple as onboarding meetings. Does that make sense?
It does. And as you're talking here, one of the things I started thinking about is all the different phases of what I do in these projects. So I started to think that I would perhaps create the implementation timeline, project scope. I would probably do a requirements gathering. And then I might even, let's say, generally like NetSuite breaks down into major areas, like you're doing the financials, you may be doing CRM, you might be doing supply chain, the different areas of it. So I could see creating requirements and maybe NSCO, let's say they have both ERP and CRM that we're implementing for them. I would see creating an NSCO ERP requirements and an NSCO CRM requirements note maybe.
Even better, the other thing you can do is you can create a template for each of them, so that you already have, CRM requirements, and then you just name it whatever the client is. So for example, this is something I do with blog posts, with any project I have a template that's just the same template over and over again, because then you actually don't have to, every time you do this, you don't have to actually remember the tags. The tags are already in the template. That and you've already done that with meetings, but we're just getting a bit more granular here in terms of how we do this, so that it becomes a lot more straightforward for you to find stuff and to organize stuff. Because I think that is one of the first sort of objections I get from a lot of people when they hear this whole idea of an self-organizing workspace. So how do I organize this thing? You don't have to, that's the point. But that is so counterintuitive, because we are so used to having to create structure no matter what note-taking app we've used before. And this kind of frees you of that burden. But at the same time, you don't want to have so little structure that you can't find anything. Fortunately, like MEMX makes a lot of this easy. But again, if you wanted to, for example, have all your CRM requirement gatherings for a bunch of different clients, that would make things easy, because then you could say, okay, here are my CRM requirement gatherings for NSCO. Here are my CRM requirements for whatever, TikTok. We're just coming off examples off my head. But then you could say, okay, and then if you see all those MEMs together, you're like, all right, here are the requirements gatherings. Then you could just go in and enter tasks into the requirements gathering for each one of those. And when you go to your task section, they would all be organized by client. So that's the other thing, right? So one of the things also when it comes to projects, sometimes it makes sense to just put all the tasks on the main page for that client, because otherwise you end up having all these different groups of tasks. So structuring projects, it can be a bit of a challenge, as we talked about, like the, task things aren't perfect. So, because I realized this after making 2 attempts to organize projects where I had a separate page for tasks. The problem was that I called it tasks, but it didn't remind, I couldn't remember what project it was for, even though I opened it up. So if I put, for example, it was like, if we had, this is the onboarding meeting, but let's just say you had NSCO and it was just like all the tasks on that page, you could have just a general page as we talked about before. This all makes sense.
It is. It's making a lot of sense. And this is where I'm thinking, I think the way we work now, especially with remote work and having so many Zoom meetings, that you end up on sort of the hamster wheel of meetings and capture. And one of the things I just wrote there that occurred to me is, with this structure we're talking about now, enables you to put the linkage between all of that capture you're doing. And so you're putting a structure around it. And so having repetitive tasks coming out of the templates, there's a methodology that we follow for these implementations. So if I weave that methodology in, then it's just the client context, like you were talking about, that's changing for them.
Yep. I'll give you one even better. Open up, close this, open up a browser window. My old roommate told me about this, and I was like, this is a godsend. So go to fathom.video. So this is by far the best Zoom note taker that I've ever seen, because what it does, as you can see here, while you're having a meeting, you can basically create a list of action items, insights, and then you can copy and paste those directly into Mem after the meeting is over.
Really?
Now, the only thing that I want them to do, I sent them an email, is create a Zapier integration so you don't even have to go through the headache of copying and pasting directly into Mem. But you can see this. This is one of those things where, rather than having to go through an entire transcript, you can just copy and paste the highlights and then put them into your notes for that meeting, so that way, basically your entire time you're just spent engaging with the person. So for example, if I wanted to right now, I could bring this note taker up and have all the notes for meeting. So this is actually one thing that really helps with meeting notes, particularly ones where you have a lot of follow-up action items. And that's, something that's very useful. Like I did this, when I did the case study for my friend, just so I could go back and figure out, okay, where did this person say something that I can, use as a good highlight? Where can I use things that are going to be potential titles or positive testimonials, that kind of stuff.
So as the meeting's going on, you're just clicking this bar on the right to
exactly indicate. Not only that, you can type what the insight was.
Oh wow, that's very cool.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to check that one out.
Yeah, that ends up being a huge time saver. So really like I said, what it boils down to is, when I saw your setup, the first thing I thought is, this is not an issue of a person who's not working properly. It's literally just a tagging problem.
Yeah. You said something really good I wanted to capture, actually, with the tags. You said tags are for something and links are for something else.
Tags are for connecting notes and links are for connecting ideas.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's really good.
So for example, if let's just say you want to let's say you could basically create, your idea in this case would be in this case, it's just meeting and mem tips. But let's say an idea you want to have is key insights I got from Srini. You would do that as a bidirectional link, and then you'd be able to find all of that.
So in other words, so going here, maybe I would just do like this one.
Exactly. You got it.
And then go here, and then I could just type them in, these two.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe I take them from here and put them here, and then make that a title.
Yep. And you don't really have to tag it because it'll be tied to this meeting anyways. And with MemX, it won't matter. And yeah, if you click on the MemTips tag,
I'll get this one anyway.
It'll show up there.
That's exactly what I was thinking. My first thought was it's become habit now where I go here and go, okay, what are my tags?
Yep. Yeah. So that's like I said, that right there is like one of the biggest problems. And I saw that right from your setup. I was like, oh, this is more than anything just an issue of tagging. So if you think about it, the less tags you use, the easier it's going to be to decide what tags to use, right? So basically you have X number, for example, onboarding requirements, CRM requirements, meeting notes, partner meeting, client meeting. It's just, you probably have maybe 10, 12 tags that make sense to use on a regular basis, because things like NetSuite, ERP, CRM, like you said, are potentially redundant. So you might have a total. So for example, like I have blog post idea, landing page copy, book notes, interview notes, that kind of stuff.
So they'd be like around topics, like things like requirements.
So context, not topics.
Context, right? Yes. So so for me with my IT consulting, maybe onboarding.
Yeah, the way to think of context in your case is your key responsibilities for servicing your clients would be your contexts.
Yeah.
And you probably do the same thing for every client. Yeah, like we talked about, the content changes, the client changes, but the overall process is the same every time. And the other byproduct of this is it makes everything a lot more scalable when you're not reinventing the wheel for something you've done 50,000 times, probably. Like you probably can do this in your sleep because you've done it for so long. The problem is that when it's in your head, you basically are still reinventing the wheel for something you know exactly how to do. And so then, to your point earlier that we were talking about, you basically reduce the cognitive load of managing information and you basically get that bandwidth back for the thing you want to do most, which is the execution.
Right. Yes. Really by letting them store the repetitive things, right?
Yeah, the whole idea is truly, if there's any knowledge management tool to date that has actually lived up to the promise of remember everything, it's Mem.
Yeah.
Because no matter what you capture, I can't tell you the number of random things I've just sent to myself as a thought via text message. That I think is what makes Mem so different. Is you not only that, you don't even have to tag it now. You can just search for that thing and you'll eventually find it, whatever it is. And not only that, when you're working on other things, it'll randomly surface, because as you accumulate a critical mass of knowledge, you get what is a compound interest effect, which typically for most people happens right around 50 or 60.
Yeah. Well, I have 587, so I should definitely have some insights coming out.
Yeah.
And I think one of my issues so far has been not really utilizing this a whole lot yet. I'm always capturing and I'm not.
Yeah.
And I think it's because the lack of like connective tissue, it wasn't optimized.
Well, that's the thing. So now if you see all your tags there, right? Now imagine if you had whatever client, it was like, oh, here are onboarding requirements. Here, all be right there, so that you're doing the same thing over and over again. It's a weekly client meeting, onboarding requirements, CRM requirements. All of that ends up being right there. So for example, or let's, if you put implementation timeline and you wouldn't tag, so the tag here would just be implementation timeline. You don't, remember, we want to keep those tags very general.
Right. Yeah, I have one for implementation already. I'll probably go timeline.
You'll have to create, you have to create one. Cool. All right. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Okay.
I really like this idea of breaking down all the major things. Like you said, those key 10, 12, maybe max 20 tags that are all about the things I do over and over again.
Yeah. I think that most of us probably have anywhere between, to your point, 10 to 20 things that we do repetitively. We just don't think of. And so this actually streamlines that entire process of knowing where everything is at, but also just retrieving the right information at the right time.
Definitely.
Cool.
That makes a ton of sense.
All right. So we've talked a bit about meeting notes. What else can we address in this call that would be helpful?
Yeah, definitely the meeting notes are one of the biggest things. I think some of the other things that I'm doing, and I probably have one here. Yeah, like the Sweet World Conference. So I'm doing things that are not just client delivery, but around running my business. I have something here called lessons learned and methodologies. So these are some of the key things that I do that are overarching on top of all of the clients. Some lessons learned, and then I've got my links to my other notes. So I did start doing some of this linking where got the best practice links, and then I have this area for my method. Oh, here it is. Here's my simply put NetSuite methodology. So you can see some of the key things. So now I'm thinking a lot of these might become my tags.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. You got it.
These are mem tags.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. And then another thing I'm doing is I play in a band, so you can say I've got my set list for my upcoming show. My band is called Sweet 66, so I'm doing that. So I am trying to capture pretty much all of my contexts in mem, my personal, my work. So I don't know if you have any thoughts around having personal, work, and various
so one of the things that I do is if anything is personal related, I just either tag it as open loops or personal, and those could be things like bills, for example, or often important numbers, right? Like bank account numbers, driver's license, insurance policy numbers, license plate, all that stuff. So I have like just an overarching document with all that stuff, but you don't even have to do that. You can put them into separate mems. And if you just tag those mems, important numbers or important personal info or something like that, then you have all the most important personal info you need right at your fingertips, because it's funny how quickly when somebody asks for that stuff, now I can just pull it up in 2 seconds. Yeah. Stuff like that. My dad the other day was like, how does this stupid coffee maker work? And I'm just like, okay, give me a second. Here's a YouTube tutorial, like 10 seconds later, as opposed to having to go and search for YouTube. Or for example, if I have book notes or if I have books I want to recommend to somebody, I have all the links that I need right there in mem. So it just ends up being really fast.
And you can see what's interesting here is when I clicked on my band, I also run a drumming lesson website, and I have a YouTube channel called Top Down Drumming. So it's interesting, when I clicked on this, you can see that surfaced for my Top Down Drumming site. And then I've got some links to a file where I keep my title cards and everything. And so it's interesting that it made that linkage for me between my band and my drumming lessons.
Yeah. So one thing I do is I actually have all my outlines for every video that I'm going to create for the Maximize Your Output channel. So right after you and I get done with this, I will actually have a mem that basically is maximize your output YouTube video, and it'll automatically be linked to my channel. And then I'll just outline all the things I want to say so that it's all there. But like you said, there you go. You have it as tagged as Top Down Drumming. So same thing. I basically tag everything that is related to the YouTube channel as Maximize Your Output YouTube channel. or
Right.
I tag it as video, because again, video is very clear because there's other things I have to do for the channel. Sometimes it's copy or descriptions, but typically I try to put as much information in one mem for these YouTube videos as possible,
Right.
whether it's a script for the mem or whatever it is.
Yeah. I paste this into a lot of my videos, and so I'm keeping, that so I can
Yeah,
just
and this
compare.
is actually great because you can just use Mem Spotlight to put this right into your video.
Yeah. So this will go right into the next video I post with the links to my other videos and stuff. So
yeah, totally.
yeah, great.
Cool.
Awesome. Super. Yeah, this is super helpful. So I really just need to rethink my tagging, and I think continue down the road that I've started on, which is the more bi-directional linking, and rely less on tags for that.
Yeah, like I said, it all depends on the context, or whether, to me, at least my philosophy is links for tagging, connecting ideas, tags for connecting notes. So just out of curiosity, just for people watching, how much time do you think that this will save you in the long run based on, with this new approach? Like, how much more will this streamline your workflow?
Oh, yeah. If I can get this right, especially when we talked about having these tags be more generic, it's going to save me. I can't even fathom how much time. It's going to be really just probably days, to be honest, of savings, because I'll be able to look across clients all at once by, instead of being so specific and narrow, with having this more broader perspective on my tags being the major things that I'm doing over and over again. I'll be able to zoom right to them and look across clients. And what I'm really hoping I'll start to get is insights around commonalities that may have been previously buried, but now they'll surface. Requirements gathering. All these clients had this same issue. And maybe that's a solution we need to build to offer to our NetSuite clients going forward.
Yeah.
So it's not just time savings. I think it's tremendous value as well. I'll get a lot more value out of it.
Excellent. Thank you for subjecting yourself to my insanity and my obsession with Mem. I'm glad to hear that has been helpful. And for those of you who are watching, I will include a link if you are interested in signing up for a one-on-one session with me. And as always, feel free to leave questions in the comments below.
Thanks.